Good evening. Last week we talked about Jonah fleeing to Tarshish when God called him to Nineveh. I don't want to ask anyone to raise their hands per se, but I do want to present you with a rhetorical question. Have you ever tried to run away from God when He was clearly calling you to do something? I have. Guilty. As humans in rebellion against God, we have all kinds of idols we like to run to instead of our Creator. Video games, alcohol, slot machines, or maybe even our own family. Before we get into Jonah, let's turn our Bibles to Genesis 22:1. Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. Abraham is in the land of the Philistines. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it on his son Isaac. And he took his hand, the fire, and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. If this doesn't scream Jesus to you, I don't know what does. Verse 9. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, nor do anything to him. For I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And in your offering shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. A lot of people miss some of the context of this passage. See, God isn't just here testing the faith of Abraham. He's telling him to sacrifice his greatest idol. Abraham had put Isaac on a pedestal after trying for so long to have a child. Anyone here born when your parents were the age of 35 or older? Different, isn't it? Don't just think that sex, drugs, and rock and roll stand alone as the idols in your life. Anything you put worth in can be an idol. All worship goes to a god of some kind. Even the word worship means worth-ship. What about your health? I'm not saying that health isn't important, but are you setting God aside to go to the gym? Bodybuilders come to mind. Work out 6 hours a day, eat perfectly spaced meals, sleep 10 hours, etc. Well, Jonah cared about his safety and well-being more than he cared about listening to God. Like the story of Abraham and Isaac, did he really think that God would send him to die in Nineveh? I don't think so. He just didn't want to do it. He knew it was a horrible city, and he didn't want to go. Let's get back to Jonah, starting in chapter 1, verse 17. The sailors have just thrown him overboard. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Depending on the translation you have in front of you, Lord will be put in all caps. That's because the author uses the divine name Yahweh. It is the proper singular masculine name of God, uppercase G. There can be no question who sent the fish to swallow Jonah. A less important detail, but still worth noting, is the use of the term fish. In Hebrew, the word used is generic for a sea creature, so a great fish would be any large sea creature. In the New Testament Greek, it is translated as whale, so that should put an end to any sea monster debates. The second sentence here is the key that ties the story of Jonah to the New Testament. Jonah's in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Real quick, if any of you were paying attention, today we think of the death, burial, and resurrection taking place over the course of 2 days. That's just not how the Hebrews and Greeks treated a day. They counted the Friday, the Saturday, and the Sunday as 3 complete days. Anyone in antiquity would have recognized this. The Bible is not in error here. So enough apologetics training. Last week we talked about Matthew 12. You don't have to turn here, but Matthew 12:40 says, "For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." The Old Testament foreshadows, the Son foreknows what God has foreordained. Getting back to Jonah, we'll begin chapter 2. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. And out of the belly of Sheol, the place of the dead, I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me, weeds were wrapped about my head. At the roots of the mountains, I went down to the land, whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you, into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. Remember Abraham and Isaac, but I with the voice of thanksgiving will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Some translations use deliverance here instead of salvation, but I think salvation is the better reading. Both the ESV and the KJV translate it as salvation. Lord, again, here is in all caps. Verse 10. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and had vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. When Jonah was in the belly of the beast, he remembers the Psalms. Psalm 118:5 and Lamentations 3:55 and 56 are what come to mind. I'd recommend writing those down. Jonah talks about the rich goodness of the Lord, how truly great God is. God planned for Jonah to flee. He sent the whale, and he commanded the whale to spit him out. Next week we continue in chapter 3, but for now, let's have a silent prayer and thank God for how great he truly is in sacrificing his Son for our sins, and for the great plans he has laid out for us. God bless you. Thank you for joining us in our study on Jonah. I just wanted to give you a quick reminder that even though I would love to be your pastor, I'm not. It's best if you can be part of a local church body and give to that all you can. But if you have a surplus and you'd like to help out our ministry, you can find a Patreon link in the description. Thank you.